Never thirsty. Never thirsty.
How does it work with people that are using like this new, there's all these sort of Splice type programs where like you can grab lyrics and this type of stuff. Is that stuff allowed to be on TV?
That is allowed to be on TV. If you pay for, if you properly do it through Splice, or you have a loop CD or something like that, that is okay. You are allowed to license that, and you don't have to go back to Splice to get permission. It's interesting because we just went through this with a bunch of artists that we're representing. Some of them were actually produced by WireFang, and some of the guys had used some Splice stuff. And we actually got a hold of, we talked to somebody at Splice and said seems to be, two different, trains of thought here, that if there's a sample, not a sample, but if there's a Splice loop, if you want to license it, you have to go to that creator and get permission. You don't have to. Now, if your song has a James Brown sample in it, for example, and you've cleared it, you probably have only cleared it for digital streaming, right? When you go to place something, every writer, whoever that is, has to give you permission to be on that show for that placement. That's the one thing that is often misunderstood. So for an independent artist, yeah, we usually say it's way better off if there's no samples on at your level, right? Because the thing about it is, if they're trying to license a real big song, they're going after a Kanye West song, and there are samples in it, the show, the network will take the time to go clear it with everybody, right? But if they're dealing with an independent artist over a $5,000 license, they don't want to have to go and contact the James Brown representatives, for example, and start negotiating with them, right? It just gets too hectic, too complicated. So
I think there's like a very interesting aspect that I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. I just think like this needs to be said. I mean, back in my day, and I'm sure we're close to the same age, all of us in here, I don't know how old WireFang is, but back in the day,
I'm not sure WireFang knows how old WireFang is. That's just my feeling.
But back in the day, a song, if you go really far back, you'd have to wait for that song to come on the radio. You'd get lucky to tape it. Songs had long shelf lives. Songs could be a hit for, 52 weeks. You could have the same song because there wasn't access to it like there's, unless you went and bought the album or the CD. There was no way to hear that record unless it was on the radio or MTV or something like that, or you taped it on a little cassette. And nowadays, there are still some breakthrough songs. I'm not going to, of course, there's still like exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, a shelf life for a song is very short. People who can find any song at any time and like play the shit out of it in 3 days, the song gets old very quickly. And I'm saying that what you do is sort of indirectly it's sort of a preservation for music too, because you're saying that there is more than a shelf life on Spotify. There's a shelf life that exists within this new avenues to put songs in television and movies. And, a song that was made 15 years ago could show up again in this movie in 2025.
Yep. No, you're right. I mean, look, I represent artists that aren't actually together anymore, that made an album 15 years ago that was great, right? But for whatever reason, it didn't do anything, or sometimes they didn't even put it out, right? So look, I get a lot of thrill out of being able to tell those artists, like, hey, I placed one of your songs, and they feel validated, like, hey, it's out there getting some attention and something, and somebody's enjoying it. And you're right, in a way, it's out in the public, being represented in some sort of way. That's great. I love when I can do that, especially older stuff that, like I said, is good. And for whatever reason, it didn't sell, it didn't come out. There's so much stuff, as you would imagine, everywhere, right?
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask one quick thing. So, like, back when you first started out, like, I have some friends that are in the placement game too. Like the guys that he's not there anymore, but he started Jingle Punks a long time ago, and he used to be an editor, so like that's how he sort of figured that out. He was like, well, if I'm picking these songs, why can't I find an easier sort of application? Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. But my point is that back when you first kind of started out, it was like anybody who had like beats in their computer could, like, you know, people were just looking to fill catalogs and fill things with songs, and that's changed. Like quality has come back. It's come full circle again, where, you know, everybody has beats now, and you don't want just beats anymore. You want songs, and good songs. It's not like as simple as, you know, I used to have a show on MTV, and like there would be the same cues you heard on our show as the same one you heard on this cooking channel show and the same one you heard on this Wives of Atlanta show. It was the same sort of library being hit up, but it's not really like that anymore. So people out there who are like firing off 20 beats thinking, oh, I'll send it to Jeff Siegel and now I'm going to be rich. It's not like that. Am I right?
Yeah, you're right. You know, interestingly enough, 20 years ago, the music that was being licensed was not as good as it is today. One of the biggest reasons was, like I said, I mentioned it earlier, that, you know, bigger artists didn't want to license to TV and film. That was seen as like low end, right? Like, really, you know, oh, you need a license to, you know, this show or whatever because you know you can't sell records anymore. That changed, right? Yeah. When CD stopped selling and there wasn't, you know, Spotify yet, and there were there was like 8 years or 10 years, maybe even a lot of dryness, right? When it was just music was being downloaded and nobody was paying for it. Everybody decided, well, let's do more into sync because they're actually still paying money there. So the quality started going through the roof, right? You had artists who would never license, all of a sudden license.
Right. And did that coincide at all? And I don't know if I'm just being like a conspiracy theorist here, but Michael Jackson passed away. And I think like right after he passed away, you started seeing Beatles songs and Michael Jackson songs like show up in places that you would have never seen him before. Like, I don't know if that like directly correlates with what you're talking about, but that had to have some influence on other artists who were watching a commercial and were like, wait a minute, that's a Rolling Stones song. Like they never put songs in commercials.
Well, yeah. So look, I think it went this way. Every artist over the last 15, 20 years makes less money from record sales than they did, let's say, in the 90s. Every single one of them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I was reading something, even Metallica was complaining about it because someone said, you know, you guys are on the road a lot, you know, playing a lot. It's like, yeah, well, we don't make money from album sales like we used to, so you got to make it up somehow. So everybody took that hit. So the money coming from sync became more alluring, and yeah, you heard you heard big bands, and when you hear those bigger bands, I think it starts to drag everybody in, you know. Yeah,
like all of a sudden, like the Eagles are like, well, we're missing out on a payday. Let us in.
Never thirsty.